Paul, great to see you for episode 4. I love that we're this far into the program already, and I look forward to many more episodes to come. With this episode and what we've discussed and building on last episode, really diving in, one thing that I've been thinking about that's been ringing in my head is this idea of you don't know where to go unless you know where you've been. Otherwise, everything seems to be like you're on this set, predetermined course towards a destination that has been picked for you. So it's imperative for people not only to understand definitions and the terms and the concepts and how they apply, but another theme that we've been digging up in our conversations is you have to understand the history and the context of these ideas and the concerns that they bring about for potential disasters because of, well, frankly, the fallen nature of man. What do you think about that? I mean, am I on track here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's our ultimate end, the track that we're on right now. The ultimate end for humanity is genocide in the machine, transhumanism, and the lure of virtual reality, which is going to offer people a false sense of eternal life and eternal health. It's not going to offer them anything but a delusion and ultimately death and then ultimately hell. The current that most people are in, they don't have any idea how they got here. They're swept up in it and they're just floating along. And they think all they have to do is be a quote unquote good person, whatever that means to them. And they'll wind up in heaven. That's if those are the people that even believe that they have a soul and an eternal destiny. But for those who don't, this is probably the conversation for them anyway. So, but those of us that do, that eternal destiny is very much dependent on our intent. And if we have no idea what's going on around us, how we got here, it's almost impossible to really apply our intent to our destiny. So having said that, our ultimate end for our genocide with the devil wants us all dead. And that's where we're headed with transhumanism in the virtual realm, having stated that the virtual realm is ultimately where they want everybody, the void. I think it's critical that we understand that this idea of virtual reality is really ancient. It's not these ideas that we think are all flashy and modern and new. They're not. They have their origins very, very much secured in the ideas of ages long past. The idea in philosophy of the virtual realm was the question of what was called continuity, and it was asked of the philosophers way before Plato and Socrates, centuries even before them, back probably as far as Thales. And the idea of continuity, the question was, is this reality that we call reality, is this realm of this world, this experience that we have, is it continuous? Is it continually connected? In other words, is it analog? Or is it a series?
See what you did there.
Yeah, I'm a genius, man. Go figure. Or is it a series of indivisible points? So is it digital? And because our senses can't tell the difference, our senses don't know the difference. If those points are so close together that we can't tell, it's just as likely to be a series of indivisible points as it is to be a one connected in continuity, an analog situation. This has been the question that's been asked for centuries on end. Aristotle went a long ways in proving that it's actually analog in his physics, where he juxtaposed distance and time and realized that it's infinitely divisible, and it is therefore analog. That we call analog. It's one. It's continuous. You can divide it further and further and further, and it's always connected. It's not digital, but it's been a question for a long time, and it's nothing new. Obviously, it's thousands of years old. Now we're at a time period, though, however, where we can actually make that virtual realm possible because we have the material and the scientific and the mathematic technology and knowledge to actually create the other realm other than the analog, which is the digital realm, which is a series of indivisible points. And that's where they want us That's where they want us to go, ultimately joined with machines in a false sense of eternal life, juxtaposed, absolutely contradictory to Christ in real eternal life in the hereafter. They're luring humanity into this false delusion. You can have heaven on earth right here. So, if you don't understand that, then I'm going to vary from a very high flyover of the history without getting too much into all the specifics and details that are this would be a whole course or longer, a whole year in a college course at least or longer, if you're really going to get into the details. But my intention here is just to give the overview and then maybe give the impetus to the viewer to do his own research, to look into this stuff, to study. It's not only imperative for his eternity and for the good of humanity, it's also a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun. It's more rewarding and enriching than almost anything else you can do. It really becomes part of your spiritual and your prayer life and your connection and relationship with God. So, having said that, this ultimate end that they want us in is an old idea, a deception, an old deception that now we're able to actually put into practice. I'd like to just go over some of the highlights and show over the course of history how we got here in the West. I'm going to focus on the West. I'm not going to get into Hindu philosophy. I'm not going to get into Islam. I'm not going to get into Judaism. I'm just going to focus on the philosophical ideas and the important people that actually fundamentally changed philosophy from metaphysics, which is the search for the understanding of the most universal causes and principles of all, which obviously lead to theology because God is the cause and principle of all, to where it was actually downgraded to practical philosophy. And now it's just about earthly things, material things.
We're taking a break, just like we did last episode, to talk about why this episode in this program is possible. And that's through supporting this work by purchasing Mount Doom, A Prophecy of Tolkien Revealed. It's this book that was written by Paul List himself and co-authored by Ali Ghaffari. You can check it out on www.readmountdoom.com. You can also check it out on Amazon, which right now it has a 4.9 star rating. So all of your support in looking at this book and taking all of the information from this program, it's all in the book. So please check it out at www.readmountdoom.com. And let's get right back to it.
I'm just going to dive in and start, and I'm going to go back to where probably a lot of people will be able to pick up the show, and that would be with Plato and Plato's idea of the forms, which was the nature of essence and the nature of substance. And his idea was a dualism, where the forms were outside of this realm, and we are only participating in them here in this material world. And there was really no connection between the forms and the substance. So there were two substances, a formal substance, which was beyond our reach in the eternal, and we participate in it in this realm, in the material realm, but there's really no connection. Aristotle came along and went, no, that's wrong. And he actually put the forms and the substances together as a necessary, joining constituencies that made material existence in the material realm possible. The form has to be joined with the substance. And that brilliant solution he called hylomorphism. And that really changed the nature of philosophy for the better, very much so, changed for the better. And it highly influenced philosophy for thousands of years for the better. So then we got into the other day, Joe, you and I got into, and then we cut it out or we had to start over again or whatever. We got into the development actually of language. And we've talked about that before. And the development of Latin is really, really critical to where we are today and how we got here. And the old Latin, rugged Latin that was used by the run-of-the-mill Latin citizens, really like pre-Caesar, was very, very, it was crude. very crude. It was joined together over by many blendings of with the Greek culture. It was Hellenized and became, a lot of these concepts didn't have words because, as we said before, there's thing, concept, word. They didn't have the thing, they didn't have the concept, so they didn't have the word in Latin, but they did in Greek. So Greek heavily influenced the Latin language, and a lot of Greek words that were Greek philosophical concepts were actually joined with the Latin language, and that was developed over time into classical Latin, and that's where we get the language of Cicero, Caesar, and some of these other ancient writers that were beautiful poets and whatnot. And then through the development after Christ and the truth was revealed, God became incarnate and joined with his creation, suffered for our sake, and died so that we could be with God for eternity if we made the effort. And it's not just about claiming that we have faith. We actually have to try and make an effort. Now was developed what was called ecclesiastical Latin, and that was where we had all these theological terms also that were added into it. So Latin really, really, really was a hodgepodge of a lot of languages. And eventually, through the development of the church, Latin was really codified, really solidified, and became something that wasn't it became much more uniform. And this led to, and I'm going to skip hundreds of years, after the basic, the fathers and doctors, the fathers of the church anyway, to widespread understanding and a widespread use, particularly in the educated class, of the use of Latin, regardless of what other language, whether it was German or French or English, quote unquote. Of course, it was probably Middle English at that point. But they also spoke Latin, and Latin was very much a harmonizing. But what Latin did was it enabled much more of the Western civilization to understand and appreciate and read the pagan poets, authors, writers. And what that ultimately did was it opened up this period, the development of what's called humanism. And of course, academia has turned that into the humanities. Okay. So humanism is basically the infatuation with the pagan heathen world, classical pagan heathen world. The Western world became absolutely infatuated with the pagan pre-Christian world. And it was very much a lure, and it lured them in to the pagan ideas and the pagan morality. And so we've got this Latin now that came in. Great. It's a great language, but it opened up and made available all these other pagan, heathen, pre-Christian concepts that were not positive. And so we had people going out and raiding monasteries and whatnot, and looking and digging up as much ancient antiquity, as much writing as possible. And that eventually developed and caused the Renaissance. And the Renaissance was this full-scale infatuation with the classical Greco-Roman civilizations. And it wasn't bad in and of itself, except for it was a huge distraction from Christianity. And also the morals of the pagan heathens were degraded, very much so. So there was that, but that developed a huge sense of pride in mankind, a very, very deep pride in mankind that ultimately turned into a worship of man at the expense of a worship of God. And by that time, in the 12th, 13th century, the universities, which, as I pointed out before, the word universal in Greek is Catholic. That's why it's a Catholic church. It's a universal church. It's no longer the chosen people. The old covenant died with the birth of Christ. It's a universal. All people now are chosen. So the universities actually, with the educated class and the professors, and they were brilliant, obviously, but they became very, very prideful, and they resented the church and the clerics who they typically looked down on as being uneducated and ignorant. You can see that in all kinds. You can even see it in Monty Python. Some of his stuff where he's got the monks going through and they're banging their head. With the book and whatever, and they're always putting him down. Sarcasm has been a really, really, really deadly tool for the academic class, and probably nobody used sarcasm any better than Erasmus. And Erasmus was probably the leading humanist of his day, and he was right before, he was association with Luther. And as I pointed out before, Erasmus was instrumental in undermining the credibility of the church through the pamphlets and the writings and whatnot that he promoted, and very much pushed Luther into the Reformation. And then when Luther went over the edge and actually broke from the church, he conveniently went back to the church and finally, proclaimed that he was Catholic and whatnot. But by then he totally undermined his credibility on both sides. So now we have the Reformation, and what happened during the Reformation was the church lost control of fully half of the universities. Somebody can do the research and figure out, but every country that went Protestant, or the realms that went Protestant, they stole the church. They stole the property. They took the endowments. They took the lands. They took the cathedrals. They took the monasteries, and most of the monasteries they crushed, burned, destroyed, got rid of the nuns and the monks, devastated Christianity. And the universities became the apex of Western civilization in those realms rather than the church. And they would hang on to various forms of Lutheranism or Anglicanism or Calvinism, which is really deadly. And they formed other ideas, theological ideas, where they could still claim to be religious, because nobody wanted the title of atheist, because atheist was a real problem, because you basically are saying you're an idiot, because you're saying that this is all just an accident and there's no cause, which nobody believed that. And then that developed into deism, and then deism was just practical atheism. Because everything has step by step by step. So from real true Christian theology from the Catholic Church into the protest and all the various breakings away into these Protestant heresies, and then it went to deism, and most of our founders, a lot of our founders in the United States were deists. And the idea of deism is just that, oh yeah, there's God, but he's not involved with this. He doesn't have anything. He just wound the clock and lets it run. And this all really just comes from the idea of materialism, which was big, Bacon and Descartes and a few others. And they just turned their ideas from the metaphysical and universal causes to the practical causes. And they looked for attributes and properties rather than essences. And Bacon's whole idea was, well, if we can copy the attributes of something, for instance, if we can make a softish heavy metal that's yellow, we got gold. So it wasn't about essences anymore. It was really just about attributes and properties. I've dubbed it attributism. It was their idea. And their idea was everything is a machine. It's all a machine, and we can treat it as a machine. Ultimately, we can treat our bodies as machines. The idea then went from eternal destiny with the truth, with the Catholic Church at the heart of Western civilization, to now fully half under the Protestant domain, which is really just the government, okay, and the wealthy. So now you have a different end, and that end, like we talked about before, needs means. So you've got means to an end, and the means were the development of the understanding of not essences anymore, but particular scientific or physical material facts. Okay. And then from there you can build on, and you can build. And ultimately that sparked the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution is nothing more than the advancement of the machine, one step at a time. So once we get into this realm now, where the whole mindset, humanism is huge now. Okay. It's not about God. It's about man. And it's not about eternal causes. It's about It's about material wealth and power here in this world right now, and the development of machines, because after all of creation is just a machine. Now that God doesn't even play a part in. He just wound the clock and walked away, quote unquote. So we've got a whole different ideology now, and for our destiny. And now our destiny, fully half of the Western civilization has been pointed in the direction down, very much down, no longer up anymore, no longer looking for our destiny in God, but looking for our destiny right here on earth in a fake imitation of heaven, that we can make heaven on earth. Bacon said something that we can alleviate, or we can eliminate the consequences of the fall. He says that in his Novo Organum, and I think it's the last paragraph of the last chapter. So our means now become scientific inquiry through absolutely empirical physical data and experimentation. They absolutely downplay and get rid of the scholastics, who were looking for our eternal destiny, not this slave destiny here in this world, but our eternal destiny. They got rid of those. They defamed them as much as possible. They turned all their direction and their means to their ends to worldly power and wealth and long life here in the here and now by the development and advancement of machinery. So after a period of time, now you've got some people that come into play, for instance, like Leibniz, in, I think it's 1669, developed the binary number system, okay, which could be read linearly super fast. Ultimately, that becomes machine code. And then we've got the development of the machine. The first machine that actually uses that kind of language is the Jacquard loom. This is all in my book, Mount Doom. It's the Jacquard loom, which used punch cards. And this is like in 1805. It's pretty early. So now we've got punch cards, or digital off and on, now producing tapestries and vast, complicated colors and displays and pictures. Okay, so we've got this digital picture. It's not making movie pictures yet, but it's making pictures in tapestry. So that develops and develops, and now machinery and becomes more and more. We've got the development of the algorithm now, which is an algorithm is just a tool. It's a if this then that, and you can really make it almost anything you want. We've got the development of the algorithm, the development of binary language, and more being integrated into machinery. And then we have Boolean logic, Boolean algebra that's developed, and which is basically trying to discover truth by mathematical principles, truth values. Okay, this becomes the basis of computer language. And then we've got the development of first and second order logic, which are the putting together of the axioms of logic with the trying to join them. They used a lot of hammer and glue, by the way, to make that puzzle analogy again, to join the axioms of logic with the utility tools of mathematics. And from there, it wasn't long before we have the advent of one Alan Turing. And Alan Turing was a famous mathematician, and he was instrumental in cracking the Enigma code. This is, again, all in my book. But he invents the digital computer on paper in 1936 with his paper on computable numbers with an application to the Inkscaidunks problem. And the Inkscaidunks problem was really just, hey, can we create an algorithm that will tell us if an algorithm is going to be computable or not? Because we're wasting all this time trying to figure it out. If we come to this question isn't even computable. Can we write an algorithm that will decide that before we waste 6 months of manual labor and all these people figuring out we wasted our time? And the answer was no. And this mathematician Church figured it out mathematically. At the same time, Alan Turing proposed a machine that would do it, and it wouldn't halt. It would just keep on running, because if there was no answer. So he decided, no, we can't write an algorithm that would figure that out. The answer to the Inkscaidunks problem is no. Okay. But this was really instrumental, and I don't think enough people realize how seminal this was to where we are right now, because if you read that paper, he absolutely lays out the pieces, the necessary for the digital computer to work. And Tolkien very cleverly uses those to create Sauron in the Second Age. Then he writes another paper in early, like 1950, Computing Machinery and Intelligence, where he invents the imitation game. The imitation game is, he redefines intelligence as just being able to mimic a human being, where a human being could interrogate it and it wouldn't know it was talking to a computer. And that's where we are with ChatGPT. Now, it's Alan Turing is very, very instrumental in this. Ultimately, Alan Turing's idea with this was to develop a machine that could harbor a human soul, because he wanted to be able to bring back the soul of his dead childhood friend and Michael lover. He was homosexual. And he wanted him to be able to reside in this machine. So you can get an idea where some of these ideas come from. And then he wrote a paper about a year later that was very instrumental called Chemical Basis of Morphogenesis. And the chemical basis of morphogenesis is basically embryology on steroids. And it mathematically shows and describes how things in a homogeneous state of a homogeneous substance in an unstable state of equilibrium with just a slight disturbance will develop into whatever. And he developed the mathematics that described this. Admittedly, he did it in two-dimensional, not spherical harmonics, which would have been way too complicated, but he did it in two-dimensional, in a circle. And he used a ring of cells to show how these morphogens would actually, in harmony, as using the harmonic overtone series, would actually work. Of course, Tolkien uses that, the ring, and he uses the harmonic overtone series to develop the rings of power. And the one ring is the root ring that's at the root of the harmonic overtone series that develops the whole series of the dominant ninth chord. And that's why the ring is dominant. All the other rings of power in Tolkien's that the elves created are analog, but this one's digital. And he describes basically, and Tolkien describes basically very cleverly, how the digital one ring, the microchip, digitally will be able to communicate with the analog brain, because it'll trick the analog brain, because the frequencies will be so close and the brain won't be able to, just like our eyes can't tell the difference if something's virtual or analog, if it's well enough made and the points are close enough together. The one ring will be able to communicate with these analog rings that are analog in our brain, and therefore the microwave, the digital information, will actually be able to control our minds. Tolkien saw that and incorporated all that in his mythology, and he's given us a warning. So this is kind of an overview of how we got here. So where we are today, now we're on that path, very much on that path that started a long time ago, where the path for the Western world, and let's face it, the Western world is the leader in the world. We're going to take everybody down, but they're heretics. They're clueless anyway. So unless they come to the truth, the reality of the truth in Jesus Christ through his church, not through some Protestant heresy, they're already on the wrong path. So they have to get back on this path. Tolkien makes that very clear in his mythology. His old mythology is about getting rid of the ring, the one ring, and undoing the chip in the cerebellum, which is Mordor. And so it's imperative that people understand how we got here and where we are. We're on a collision course with hell. And it's been very, very well over a long period of time, generation upon generation, thousands of years, to point us in this hellbound direction. And unless you understand that and make an absolute determined, intentional effort to get out of this current, off of this track, you're not going to get off of it. It's not going to be some serendipitous, oh, I fell off of it. No, you're going to have to climb out of this hole that we've been put in. It'll be like climbing Mount Doom and destroying the ring. And we've got Gollum all over us, which Gollum is intemperance, and Frodo is temperance. That's why he's master. But I have a hard time not including all this stuff. That's Tolkienian, because it's so relevant to where we are today, because that's why Tolkien wrote this, to warn humanity about this doom that we're facing right now, artificial intelligence that we're facing right now.